Brilliant. So welcome everyone to this panel of the Housing and Homelessness Scrutiny Panel. First item on our agenda is just to note the apologies. So I'll pass over to Alice to do that.
We haven't received any apologies.
Thank you. And then the second item, do any of the councillors have any declarations of interest? Any of the items on the agenda today? No.
No.
Thank you. And then finally, just not finally, got quite a few to get through. Chair's announcements, and I've just got a brief one, which is I'd like to welcome our new interim executive director for communities and people, Peter Matthews. So welcome, lovely to have you with us this evening. And then the notes of the previous meeting. So are we all happy to approve the minutes of the meeting of the 24th of April?
Yes.
Not seeing any sort of waving hands, so take those as read. And then our fifth item is looking at the work plan, so what we want to cover as a new panel over the next year. So I'll pass over to Alice initially, I think, and then we can have a discussion about scope and things.
Great, thank you, Chair. So a provisional work plan is included in the agenda pack alongside the list of suggested scrutiny commissioned items at Appendix A to the item. Those suggestions have been scored and ranked using the topic criteria, which stands for timely, Oxford specific, public interest, influence and cost. The suggestions highlighted in grey were the highest scoring, so they were the items which scored double figures when they went through the topic criteria. And the panel is asked to consider which items it wishes to consider during this municipal year. Following engagement with officers, it's recommended that the item on the Housing First Acquisition Programme Progress and Outcomes Report goes to the October panel meeting. It's recommended that the panel discuss and define a specific scope and rough timescales for the item on performance of housing associations operating across the city, which we can discuss shortly. The Housing Services Transformation presentation item, it's recommended that potentially goes to March panel. The City of Sanctuary accreditation, it's recommended that a discussion is had with officers about the timescales of that to see if it fits in with the existing work plan. On the implementation of refugee resettlement in Oxford item, so the evaluation, lessons learnt and improvements, I understand that officers are intending to touch on this during the presentation of the Cabinet report this evening, so it's recommended that the panel wait until after that item to see if they require any further information. And then on the alternative innovative solutions to the housing crisis, I've been advised that the new housing, homelessness and rough sleeping strategy sets out a hugely ambitious plan of work, which includes a raft of innovation, but means that the team is at capacity at the minute, so they don't really have capacity to commit to something else of that nature. So the suggestion is that that item be placed on the long list for the next municipal year, and then the situation can be reevaluated in due course. There's also a list of regular and standard items at Appendix A, so the panel's asked to consider requesting that the scrutiny officer schedule these items in discussion with officers and the chair as agenda space dictates. So they're the housing performance reports, which routinely come twice per year. The DSS discrimination motion update, the panel's asked to decide whether it wants an update on that this year, and equally the same can be said for the tenants forum. So back over to you, Chair.
Thank you. So I suggest my suggestion and welcoming input here would be to stick with the ones that are top rated, and then thinking about depending on how it fits in with work plans more generally, having a look at the let me just get the right list up in front of me, having a look at the City of Sanctuary accreditation if that comes up sort of at a good point during the municipal year, and also if it looks like it's going to be a helpful piece of work for us to do. I think the idea might be to have a bit of a look, starting, I guess, with one of the things that we think might come to the August meeting at the Housing First Acquisition Programme, both looking at sort of the outcomes of that, but also how it's going, having a sort of an assessment of the implementation of it. And then a piece of work which might involve some outside bodies coming in, both to sort of give a bit of evidence on casework and things, including calling on some councillors to submit some written evidence who aren't on this panel about housing associations within the city, and looking a bit at the levers that the council has to help address that when those things aren't going quite so well for people in housing association housing. And then finally having a look at the work that's currently being done in terms of the housing services transformation, which would, as Alice said, come to a bit of a later meeting once that work's sort of ongoing. And that wouldn't take the form necessarily of a report per se, but be more of a presentation and an opportunity for us to ask questions and look at some of the internal aspects of what the council's doing to support its work on housing. So I think I've covered sort of some of the things I was thinking about scope, but welcome input now. So going to Rosie and then to Paula.
Thanks. I think I grasped most of that, but I was just, one of the things I was interested in was, is there an opportunity to raise like other proposals for things that we could add to this list? One of the things I was wondering about was the a review of the licensing scheme and trying to understand how we're implementing it, given it's coming in quite it's been quite recent, and it would be good to learn as much as we can and keep an eye on that. I wondered whether that might be something we could propose. I don't know how that fits into the criteria and whether there's time and what kind of timing makes sense, but I'd appreciate others' thoughts on that. And then I also just hope to clarify what it means for the 3 that are prioritised. Sorry if I missed this, Alice, but is that the intention that those then will come through at the start of the year, or just this year and the others will come through later? I just missed the timings and the priorities, so I really appreciate some clarity. Thanks.
So I mean, I'm happy to take it as a bunch, and then if I get things wrong, Alice, you can tell me I've got it wrong. But my understanding is that for over the course that we can't do all of those things in sort of like the next meeting. So over the course of the year, we would cover those grade items and potentially the City of Sanctuary accreditation, and the other ones would join sort of the long list for the next municipal year, which the next panel, whether it's us or another group of people, could then look at and it'd go through the same process as we are now and decide whether they want to look at it. On your other point, and I'll look to if any officers want to come in on this. My understanding would be that that's precisely because of the point you make, that it's something that's being implemented now. It's probably a little bit too early to look at it in that way, because it was looked at sort of when it was going in, and now we need to see sort of what's happening with it, and that might be something to consider. My understanding would be probably next year or the year after that to look at how it's going then. But that was something that I thought about and raised, so thank you, Rosie. But I think the idea would be that to come back and have a look at that once it's had time to sort of bed in a little bit, and we can then actually see how it's going, if that makes sense. Does that answer all your questions?
Yeah, I'm not convinced that. I think it'd still be great to start early with understanding the recruitment, the early growing pains, the understanding of how much resource we might need to put into it, whether we have measured things appropriately and whether it's delivering even in the very early stages. But I hear that there's only so many things that can be put on the list. So there's just space for 3 for this year, is that right?
Well, potentially 3 and potentially a bit of space for some more, but it would depend. I guess we need Alice to kind of go away, look at what the scope that we've given is, and then have a think about how that plays out. But that's not something we can necessarily fully run. And there is a bit of room for flex, but I would also be a bit hesitant to put so much pressure on officers as well to be doing all of that work to bring it to us while they're trying to implement it themselves, if that makes sense. But Alice, yes.
Maybe a smaller review if it's, I hear that, resource, just maybe a presentation or something.
Yeah, sorry, Chair, I was just going to add, I can go away and speak to officers about timescales and then come back to the committee just to confirm what that could look like, and then we can take that discussion from there offline, if that makes sense for everyone.
Yeah, that would be great, and maybe we could have a discussion about it at the August meeting. But yes, to answer your basic question, there is scope for us to change this as we go forward as well. Paula, yes.
Thanks. Yeah, 2 things. First, the Housing First acquisition programme progress and outcomes report. I was just curious why that would be October when that's ranked one of the highest, whereas some other reports would be a bit sooner. And then the second thing is, I think you mentioned that the where was it? The City of Sanctuary would be ranked next after the top priorities, where I'd kind of say that the 5th priority of implementation of refugee settlement in Oxford would be, in my mind, that would be higher than accreditation, because you're actually doing the work and like learning from it, rather than this is what the council are doing, aren't we great? Like I'd like to know more about like the improvements we can make.
I'll let Alice maybe come in on the technicalities of the topic system.
Yes, so the housing first acquisition programme, there is a cabinet report that's tracking to August cabinet, which is on the housing panel agenda for the August meeting. So that will come forward first. Actually, the suggestion on the progress and outcomes in discussion with officers, it was felt that because of the capacity and because of the sort of forthcoming cabinet report, that actually that could be taken first in August, and then the progress outcomes report could come in October, and that sort of sequence would make sense in terms of what's going on in the teams. And then on the refugee resettlement point, so completely take your point, but obviously we have the cabinet report on the refugee resettlement this evening. And officers are, as I understand it, primed to sort of talk to the panel about the outcomes and the evaluation improvements and stuff here. So it's recommended that the panel hears the report tonight, and then if any further information is wanted by the panel, we can sort of take it from there.
It's my understanding as well that the topic is about importance, maybe rather than urgency, if there's a bit, you can see a bit of a distinction there, if that makes sense. So it's something that we'd want to look at over the course of the municipal year, but it's not necessarily therefore something we have to look at now, in the same way that a cabinet report might be urgent because it's going to the next cabinet, but maybe we wouldn't class it as a panel as important as another thing, if that makes sense. And I think about the refugee resettlement, I totally take your point, but I think it's also just about not doubling up work. So if, because we're looking at a cabinet report, we're going to have that sort of discussion now, obviously if the outcome of that discussion is that we feel like we need to look at it again, we might say, well, we want to look at it again in 6 months, or we want to look at it again in a year to see what's actually happened. And that's also something we can do. We can add things to the long list for next year now. We can have a think that's something we want to set up. So there's scope again for all of that, and for flex there as well. Does that answer your question, Paula?
Yes, thank you.
And Lawrence.
Thanks, Lizzie. I'm very pleased to see that housing associations, performance of housing associations is a #1 priority. I was just trying to work out, looking at the suggestions list, it's slightly confusing, well, at least to me anyway, in that it's got decarbonisation as a sort of floating heading, and then there's the 6 items on the priority list. I wasn't quite sure what that meant, so perhaps Alice could clarify that for me.
Yes, apologies, that's an error. It's a different template was used, and I've clearly forgotten to remove that heading, so please feel free to ignore that one, and apologies.
Well, it did remind me that we had a decarbonisation programme well, probably 2 meetings we discussed the decarbonisation programme. I think it was probably the 21-22 year, and we perhaps ought to be thinking about a report on progress, perhaps later on in this year, or even early next year.
I mean, could we can pop that on sort of the list of things to consider, but I think it comes up in the KPIs report. So I wonder if that's also a discussion we could have when we were thinking about that, or actually that's more energy efficiency than decarbonisation. But anyway, sorry, Alice, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to add that obviously this municipal year we do have the climate and environment panel, so it might be that actually decarbonisation falls under that panel now. So I'm happy to take the point away, but it might just be worth a look at to make sure we're not duplicating across the 2 panels, and perhaps maybe we can even explore having a bit of a double act between the panels if that's felt needed at some point, but happy to take it away and look at it.
A bit like when we
Yes,
get invited to the finance scrutiny panel, and it's also something, even if we don't look at it or we decide not to do a joint, or the joint thing doesn't look feasible, it's something we can suggest. They don't have to take us up on it, but we can also suggest that to the climate and environment panel as something they look at.
yes, I see your point. I'm just concerned about the decarbonisation of council homes programme and the effect it has on tenants, and whether the tenants are, how can I put it, whether the tenants are happy with what's going on, which seems to fall into our court fairly well. But yes, I can see why the climate and environment panel might have some input as well, but I think a double act is probably called for.
Yeah, and I think that also comes up if we think later on in the agenda that it's discussed in the Star Residents panel as well. So maybe if we feel like we'd like some more information about it off the back of that, that might be something to consider there as well. When we have
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I think, does that cover off what you need, Alice, in terms of scope?
Yes, I think the final thing I just need is whether the committee wants to look at the standard items, so the DSS discrimination motion and the tenants forum, if you want me to have a look at scheduling those in if it's appropriate.
Yes, please. Yes.
So just for information for the panel as well. So during this municipal year, we are due to review our tenancy strategy, which is a statutory kind of piece of work, and that will interact quite heavily with our P performance. So, and obviously that is something that will move through this panel and through to cabinet and out to public consultation. So I just wanted to sort of share that with you, so that you might want to just reflect on that piece of work in line, I guess, with a broader piece of work, and whether the work done around the tenancy strategy would meet the needs of what your thinking was in terms of performance. So it's just to share that as it's coming, and maybe if it's beyond that, I think we just might need to just define that a little bit more, so that officers can kind of be clear, I guess, on how we interact those two pieces of work.
Thank you. I think, yeah, that would be, yeah, maybe best to take offline, because I think some of that went a little bit over my head. I'm sorry. But yeah, no, that would be helpful to see. So, and which was the other, so how that piece of work interacts with which cuts across all elements of the work plan, or specific?
No. Well, sorry, Lizzie, not to be clear. It was around a very specific point around the performance of housing associations operating within the city.
Yes.
The tenancy strategy will look at that performance. It will look, for example, at rent setting, etc. So, you know, there are strong elements already running through our work. And maybe what I could do with Alice is to be very clear with you around what that does and doesn't include. And then maybe there could be a reflection whether that actually meets, you know, the needs of this panel, or whether you would like something additional.
Yeah, because I think that's also a piece of work where we wouldn't necessarily be calling so much on your time, hopefully, because we'd be looking at trying to call on other, as well as housing associations, whether they decide to give up their time or not, looking at sort of other organisations across the city who pick up casework, to hear from them what they're hearing as a sort of evidence gathering, as well as the levers that we've got as a council. And it might be that piece of work answers a lot of the questions we've got there, as you say. So yeah, if you could be clear with us as to what that covers, then maybe Alice and I could have a look at it and work out how the jigsaw fits together, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Brilliant. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to look at, let me just get, is we need to quickly sort of cover off the reports back on recommendations. So on the 15th of March and the 14th of June, Cabinet considered recommendations relating to two reports, responses to which are set out in the agenda pack. So one of those was the rough sleeping strategy, and all recommendations were agreed or partially agreed, and the second one was the tenancy agreement, and likewise. And so that's just for us to note, but if anyone's got any questions or comments, please indicate to me now. Yes, Rosie.
Thanks. I think I'm in the right place to raise this. One of the things that we talked about was the trying to understand the, what's the word, whether that when we're looking at our housing, whether something is financially viable in terms of like the balancing, for example, the environmental credentials versus the amount of space for social housing versus like housing for market rates and value, and to be sold. And I think one of the things that we discussed was to come back maybe in this year with a session at some point which would help the panel understand that kind of question around what it's meant when something is financially viable or not, because it's quite difficult to understand that concept. I wasn't sure what that looked like, but I really liked the idea of us being able to have some time to understand that better and discuss it. And I wondered whether that could be whether that went back somewhere, or whether there is any proposals for what that might look like off the back of that discussion.
I hate to say I can't. So it wasn't either of our recommendations, and I
think it was something we discussed in the meeting that officers like proposed as a way forward beyond the recommendation, if I remember rightly. I don't know if someone can remind me.
Well, maybe if we take that, because it's not in our recommendations, but maybe if we take that offline, because it sounds like it could potentially be helpful and might again be something that people in different scrutiny roles, particularly if it's a bit broader, might find helpful. So maybe we could have a chat with Lucy as well and see if maybe something more broader on that. Maybe I guess a form of almost scrutiny training on, for example, looking at financial viability and what it means, as well as some other things might be useful as a more
something that could be, yeah, thank you, something that could be informative as well as discursive would be great, like some way of us like trying to understand it but also come with some suggestions on how we like look and measure those things in the future would be great.
Yeah, maybe initially sort of a training session, and then maybe we could think, well, if there's anything off the back of that we'd like to have sort of a more discursive session on to make it, I don't know, more applicable, more widely, but who knows. That's if me and Alice take that away, if that's okay.
Thank you, that's great.
Yeah, fab. Okay, so next we're going to have a look at the KPIs, so the performance, the housing performance monitoring. So for this one, I'm going to welcome Councillor Linda Smith, Neris Parry and Emmy Ricketson to sort of introduce if they'd like to, but also happy for us to take it as read and just ask questions, whichever you prefer. Linda?
I'm happy for Neris and Amy to talk to this one.
Okay.
Thanks both. I'll try and give a brief introduction. I think the report was sent around with the agenda. So the report is for Q4 of last financial year, and I've just kind of picked out a couple of key areas, so some highlights and some kind of challenges that you would probably have picked up from the report. So within the affordable housing supply area, good progress has been made throughout the year to bring the total completed affordable homes in Oxford to 397, of which 218 of those are socially rented. So yeah, last year we've made really good progress and we're on track to meet our profile 4-year target of 1,600. Some highlights kind of in Q4 of last year include OX Place completing on the Curve, which is in between Towns Road. That was completed in January. And that's kind of predominantly 1 and 2 bedroom flats, and I believe there is a handful of 3 bedroom houses there, and that development was split, I think, around 50-50% split in shared ownership or social rent. Yes, so that was a positive from Q1. Within homelessness and housing needs, towards the end of last year into the new year, we saw a significant pressure on homelessness statutory services as well as rough sleeping, and believe that's in response to the rising cost of living crisis. Our statutory homelessness services saw a high increase in approaches to the service. In Q4, 161 initial assessments are carried out, and if you compare that to quarter one of the same year, it was more than double the amount of approaches. So that just shows kind of the real really increased pressure on some of our frontline services within housing needs. That's also led to an increase in pressure in temporary accommodation, with placements rising throughout the year. We've had more approaches of people already homeless, so our options to prevent them are limited. Despite these efforts, we continue to focus on preventing homelessness, and even under this difficult climate where we're kind of struggling to find affordable accommodation within the city and the cost of living crisis, we continue to achieve really good outcomes for household when preventing homelessness, and that's kind of shown in that we're still meeting our targets there. We had a recent visit from Department of Levelling Up and Housing Communities, and they commented that our TA numbers are really positive and stable when we compare to other South East local authorities where they've had a really sharp increase. And they were really impressed with our prevention efforts and our works to kind of move households on from TA as quickly as possible. So some positive feedback in that area there, even in some really challenging times. Within the rough sleeping area at the end of March, we had 34 rough sleepers without an offer of accommodation. There has been kind of an increase in the number of people who are new to rough sleeping in the area. And we also see a really high demand for supported accommodation with waiting lists for, in particular, some of our highest support needs units. Of those 34 without an offer of accommodation, we continue to see that cohort of around 10 individuals who have no recourse to public funds. And whilst we're still trying to engage with them to offer them support around their immigration status, there's some reluctancy from those individuals to engage with that support. We've been successful in bidding for additional funding from the Single Homelessness Accommodation Programme, which will enable us to increase our offer of Housing First. That was kind of mentioned in the earlier work plan. We can discuss that in more detail. We've also been successful in some more RSI funding, which will help us to continue to provide a range of support and initiatives to reduce rough sleeping over the next 2 years. Overall, we're starting to see a real increase in demand in that area, but we're hoping that kind of the extra resources we're getting through funding and the focus on prevention and rapidly rehousing people from temporary accommodation will help to alleviate some of those challenges. Within our council-owned housing stock, the energy efficiency in our housing stock over the last quarter, we delivered through partially government funded LAD 1B projects. We improved 47 properties to an EPC rating of C or below. We've also secured funding through the Social Housing Decarb Fund, and we use that over the next 2 years to deliver improvements to a further 316 properties moving forward. Our relet times, so throughout last year we continue to have some real challenges, resulting in some significant delays to reletting void properties in our stock. We did make some progress in the last quarter, and we got that standard relet time to down to just under 90, compared to 100 at the end of the previous quarter. So we've made some slight improvements, however that's significantly over our targets. So it's a kind of a keen area for us to improve on and work on over the coming period. I think I mentioned the last meeting around some of the challenges we're facing in those area, which kind of briefly include kind of lots of new build properties coming through, which increases the workload for ODS as well as staff within housing services. Various increased workload due to various health and safety requirements, which is kind of increasing the length of time for voids, and then kind of shortage of staff within the allocations team. So moving forward, as I said, it's a real priority for us to improve that. And there's already been some changes in Oxfordshire Direct Services, including kind of additional resources there to help with some repairs to the properties and inspections in that area. They've changes to procedures regarding routine health and safety checks to try and speed up that process. and improved efficiency through kind of digital and system improvements in that area. The allocations team are still working through around kind of 80 shortlists of properties at any one time. So whilst they're still continuing to prioritise shortlists of property that are already ready to let, this is having kind of an impact on real let time still. We're working on trying to make the processes more efficient in this area, and a recent review of the allocations team processes has been complete, which has identified some areas which we plan to change over the coming months to support faster turnaround times of void properties. And some of that includes reviews of our approach to suitable offers, developing the process to reduce the sign-off process when allocating properties, and reviewing our approach to sensitive lets. All of these sorts of things we hope to reduce the amount of time it takes to offer properties. But there's also needs to be some investment, and a big piece of work for us will be looking at the introduction of things like online application forms and self-service tools for applicants, which will simplify that process significantly, allowing officer time to be spent focusing on the shortlist and allocating those ready-to-let properties. In repairs, ODS have had strong performance against kind of the emergency repairs and kind of appointments kept, and that they have successfully rolled out kind of mobile working solutions for operatives, which have been really beneficial in improving overall performance. And within rents there, just to quickly mention that we're above target for the rent collection at the end of the financial year. So yeah, just an overview of some of the areas there. So just don't know if anyone's got any questions.
Thanks very much. Yeah, so I'll see if I've got any others from the panel. Oh, yeah, Paula, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, sorry if I missed this, but you mentioned there's an increase in homelessness. Did you manage to go through like the reasons why there's that increase?
So the reason for homelessness that we've seen over the last couple of months continues to be so at the prevention stage, we're seeing a higher increase in people approaching with evictions from the private rented sector. I think I mentioned that we're having more approaches from people who are already homeless or approaching us kind of very soon to be homeless. And the reason for that, highest reason for that is a slight increase in domestic abuse cases, some evictions from supported accommodation, but the highest reason for that kind of remains is asked to leave family or friends accommodation. But overall, I think the national picture is that the cost of living crisis is really starting to affect families and households, and is impacting on services on a national level. So that's a trend that's being seen throughout the country.
Yeah, thanks.
If Richard wanted to add anything on.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm Richard Wood, the Housing Needs Manager. I'm on the next item, but this is my area as well, so I thought I'd just jump in if that's okay. So as what Amy said, it does cover it largely. I think what's probably most remarkable about current trends is that there isn't one group that is significantly rising and causing numbers to rise. We are seeing it across the board at the moment. PRS evictions, domestic abuse, family and friend evictions, and also evictions from supported housing. So we are looking at around how we can do more prevention work with all those groups, but it's a particular challenge because it is so widespread, and we imagine linked to the cost of living crisis, and then other changes in the private rented market with changes to Section 21 and interest rates, etc., and people leaving the market as a result.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Lawrence, yes? Questions?
I was curious about the reduction in arrears of nearly in fact, just over £250,000. I realise this is financial services, but I would have thought it would have been going up with the cost of living crisis rather than down. I wonder if anybody could throw any light on that.
I can't, Lawrence, but it's a question that I can pose to colleagues in financial services and get back to you.
Okay, thanks.
On that, if that would be useful. Yeah.
Thank you. It'd be great if we could maybe get an answer for next week's meeting if possible. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, I've got quite a few. So on the first KPI, so hang on, yes, number of rough sleepers without an offer of accommodation. So I wondered so you mentioned because of the increase in rough sleepers, there's a shortfall in the amount of from West Ave to say accommodation in that service, and I assume in temporary accommodation. What sort of steps are you taking to remedy that shortfall, and how long is that sort of expected? Is that sort of a longer term project, or is capacity going to increase in the short term as well? And sort of what steps are you taking to support people who, because of capacity issues, can't be supported through that?
Yeah, so I think kind of that comment is the demand kind of outweighs the amount of beds that we have available in the Somewhere Safe to Stay offer, and that kind of links to kind of the waiting list for supported accommodation. So that there's work going on. I mentioned some work within the allocations team review there. They're working closely to look at things such as move on from supported accommodation, to try and prioritise that to free up beds within supported accommodation and move people on from rough sleeping or emergency beds such as the Somewhere Safe to Stay model. I'm going to pass it. Neris and Richard have both got their hands up, so I'll pass on to Richard first.
Should I go first, Neris, and then you correct whatever I miss? Yeah, so I suppose that's a big question. In regards to kind of the immediate things we can do, so in the report it mentions two things. So, and I can't go into the full details because officially we're embargoed by DLUC, so there will be the full announcement as soon as they give us the green light. But I probably can get away with saying that there is some more money coming, both in terms of we've made a bid to the SHAP programs, that's the Single Homelessness Accommodation Programme, for more Housing First units that would add more capacity to move people on out of the current pathway into a permanent home with support in the future. So that would be a huge help. We also have put in a bid for additional RSI, rough sleeping initiative funding that again will be going to a variety of different initiatives in the city that again would add capacity in the future, and as soon as we're allowed to share that information publicly, we will do so, and I'm sure everyone here will receive that. They're the kind of immediate things in the near future, but I think it's important to look at the bigger picture, which is we are signed up to the county-wide rough sleeping strategy that seeks to transform across the whole of Oxfordshire our approach to rough sleeping in the coming years. Obviously, last year the Alliance was commissioned jointly, the city being a lead member in that commissioning process to start that process of transformation. But over the coming months and years, you will see us moving away from the old offer that was very based on hostel accommodation to a new one that really emphasises kind of a housing-led approach where we move people into accommodation that can be their home, and that support moves with them. And that kind of wider transformation is really how we want to end rough sleeping in Oxford in the medium to long term. So those plans are there, and I think they are the right plans to get us where we need to get to. But what we can't ignore is some real acute pressure now, just because of the national picture, which is rough sleeping and homelessness is increasing across the country. The feedback from DLUC is that what we are seeing in Oxford is being seen across our peer group. When I say peer group, I mean other kind of university towns, expensive urban southern areas, and the numbers that all of our peer group are reporting are up, and they're the highest they've been since the pandemic. So there's a real challenge in the near future. None of us know how long it's going to last. We do have immediate response to that, and we still think our long-term plans are right, but there is going to be a real challenge in the near future.
Sorry.
Can I come in? It's just two very small points to a well-painted strategic picture, but obviously rough sleepers also in particular circumstances will hit statutory services. So they are also, that is, and some may come therefore into temporary accommodation. And I think this is a very minor point in the grand scheme of things, but amongst the many pots of money we do have some money around hotel placements, which we use. It's insufficient, for, and it's certainly not an offer across the piece, but for people who are particularly vulnerable, and all rough sleepers are vulnerable, but maybe females or sort of certain things, that we have some discretion to place people in those circumstances into hotels, whilst we try and get them into a sort of a more stable form of accommodation. I just mentioned those two things as well.
So it's a combination of I guess partly a transition to a new strategy and trying to build up capacity, which I guess we're going to look at in future as well, but also the particular pinch point that we've already spoken about that everyone's facing at the moment. It's difficult. I guess maybe it makes sense for me to jump ahead to point 3, which Paula already touched on, but I wondered whether you're finding that, because I hear that the private rented sector is not unexpectedly one of the biggest causes of people being made homeless or being evicted from family and friends of accommodation. Are you seeing much? Are you keeping sort of records of, I guess I imagine you are, but of sort of why people are being made homeless? And are you seeing any kind of defaults on mortgages or anything at the moment, or is that sort of not yet a major problem?
Yeah, so we do keep records for internally, but we're also statutory. We have to provide statutory returns called HSLIC to the central government on a quarterly basis. All of that information is captured for everyone who approaches us for assistance on a wide variety of different things, but the reason for homelessness is within that. And we also kind of have dashboards that kind of a live data that we're able to look at on kind of a daily basis for that information. And so I think your second part of that was around mortgage. We haven't seen kind of large numbers of those coming through, or I don't think I've seen any at all in kind of definitely not in Q4 return. But it's something to be aware of and to consider with kind of interest rates rising, definitely. But that is kind of an option that we would pick up on the data report. Rich has got his hand up there again.
Is that okay? Just jump in, just to add to what Amy's already said. I think she's answered most of it really. The only thing I will say about the records in regards to why people are being evicted out of the pro-rented sector, we're very dependent on self-declaration from clients, and that means that many clients won't exactly tell us why they've been evicted because they think it may have implications for how we treat them when they go through services. So we always have to take that data with a bit of a pinch of salt. The classic one is we never quite know if it's the landlord's evicting because they want to sell the property or if it's actually because there's been a disagreement, that kind of thing. But I suppose if the panel was ever particularly interested in that, we could bring some of that information to a future meeting. That wouldn't be too much difficulty. The only other thing I'll just highlight is that we do have services and we're putting more money into the private rented sector, trying to keep people in their homes, go upstream and prevent homelessness there whenever possible. We launched a successful landlord mediation project last year, where we actually have an officer in housing needs who, when landlords are thinking about evicting someone, can work with their landlord and consider other options and seek to mediate and keep people in their homes whenever possible. And that's been extended because of that success. And we do have an entire team now within housing needs that are based on preventing homelessness from the private rented sector. So we do a lot of work in that space, and we'll be doing more as that new team establishes to try to support tenants to stay in their homes within the private rented sector in Oxford.
Fantastic, thank you. Paula, did you have something about that?
Yeah, I guess just on the back of what you were saying, like I imagined, and I'd like to know if there's any stats on that, like that anyone with a mortgage or even a homeowner in Oxford is like extremely low in comparison to tenants both in the private and council sort of sector. Do you have any stats on that? Because I imagine that there aren't that many people who are like who have mortgages or own a home in Oxford in comparison.
Isn't it about 50%? 50-50, but very roughly.
I have, yeah, it's within our homelessness review.
Well, we use the census information that came out recently in regards to kind of tenure types, and I believe how many people have mortgages is contained in there.
Mm.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't remember off the top of my head, but we do have that information in there.
Okay. I knew it was like 50-50 in terms of private versus council, but in terms of homeowners or people on like with mortgages, I thought that was quite low. But yeah, I'll have a look. Thanks.
Okay, I had another couple of, oh yes, just off the back of something you said about, so I had some questions around why there's such a delay with voids, but I think you covered that really well in your summary, Amy, thank you. But when you were talking about sort of some of the things you're doing to increase capacity in terms of turning over houses and getting them re-let out, your point about making things digital and application forms having a digital option as well. So is that feeding, we had at scrutiny last night, we had the citizen engagement strategy came to scrutiny. Is that feeding in to the transformation of the website? Perfect. I can see people nodding that. So I just wanted to, yeah, if that's kind of coming in that larger piece of work. Brilliant. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
In fact, the citizen experience, they've already done a review. That's what's led to these changes. So yeah, it's very much aligned with that.
Fantastic. That's great. And then I've just had a few things that might turn out to be recommendations, and they are about formatting. One of them, yeah, it's actually sort of a clarity question. When you, this is me not getting my head around it rather than anything else, but when you say percentage of council owned housing stock that has an EPC rating below C, do you mean, does below mean A or B, or does below mean D to F?
So when I say below, it's A to C, but we do have this confusion internally as well. So Neris is about to say something.
But in this case, below means D to F. So yeah. So not at EPCC. Yeah. So.
Okay, so we have met, because then it's really unclear as to whether have we met the target? I guess is my question. Yes, if it's D to F. And I guess a recommendation would be, can we make that clear? Because I don't think
So, we worked on the KPIs for the following year, Lizzie, for this reason. So we have a set, we've gone through and profiled the year on your year target a little bit more. And I've got the wording in front of me. So moving forward for the next panel report, we set our target for next year, for example, for to ensure that we have 70% of properties with an EPC rating of C or above, so which would be A, B, or C. Does that make sense? So moving forward, we'll be looking at 70% of properties with a rating.
So we have met that. We have met that target. Yes.
Yes. Yes. So we're incrementally moving our way up towards that 100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can see it's not clear. Yeah.
That would be my point. Is it's obviously from that not clear to anyone. It wasn't just me kind of tying my brain in knots. And I guess another point for formatting in future, would it be possible to kind of have a bit of like a RAG rating down the side of whether we've met the target or not, so you can kind of just see? Because sometimes I've had to do, and I mean that maybe this is just me being lazy, but I've had to do that kind of, okay, so it's a below target, it's this number, and because it swaps between below and above targets, it's actually a bit hard to tell whether the target's been. I'm very lucky because Alice gave me a little crib sheet of whether the target had been met or not, but I wonder if that's just something we could do like have a column of has target been met, yes or no?
Yeah, absolutely, Lizzie. I can add that in. That's not a problem.
Thank you. And then finally, just on the target about the total number of affordable homes in Oxford completed in year, and it's a multi-year target, so the target's none set. I just wonder if there's a way we could, because actually we've made some great progress there, and it would be nice to recognise that. And it's actually like, well, we are on target. So I wonder if we could have sort of maybe NA but on target in there. That's a really small quibble, but because otherwise you have to, it's quite hard then again to extrapolate that.
Yes, yeah.
My reading is basically how there is a target and we've met it, which is the fact that we're on track. So maybe we could have the, I don't know, reframe the target. So are we on track to meet our 5-year? So it fits in the kind of 6-month update schedule.
Yeah, that works, Lizzie. That's not too difficult. Yeah, I can do that.
Fantastic. I think that covers off my quibbly recommendations. Did anyone else have anything they'd like to add before we move on? Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much to everyone and for your brilliant and comprehensive questions. And thank you to Richard for jumping in and answering questions as well, even though it's not your item. So moving on to the next item. So that is the future resettlement commitments for new refugee families. So that's a cabinet report. And I am going to ask Linda, Richard, Alan or Paul, if there's anything that you'd like to add in terms of introduction. Linda?
Yeah, shall I just say a few words quickly? Just to say I'm pleased to be bringing this report to Cabinet. I think it's consistent with our values as a city of sanctuary. It's consistent with the work we've been doing to date on this. The report is about providing sanctuary for at least 8 families, refugee families a year for the next 5 years, which I think is consistent with the programmes we've participated in to date. We know it's manageable, we know it's sustainable. What we don't want to do is put undue pressure on the organisations we'll be working with to provide support to either these families or existing refugee families in the city. And we do need to be mindful of how difficult it is to find affordable accommodation in the city. So I think this is a sustainable number to be part of this programme. And yeah, we just need to be mindful about being able to find accommodation in the short term for the families who are taking part while we're responsible for them, but also at the end of the programme. Oxford is an expensive city, unless the programme has been a success, unless families are earning money to supplement any benefits they might be claiming, it's not easy for them to find affordable accommodation to stay in the city. So we do need to be mindful of that. We don't want to be having families here, putting in all the work to settle them and for them to put down roots in the city, only for them not to be able to afford to stay here at the end of the programme. When the specific support ebbs away. So yeah, pleased with this report. Of course, we'd like to be doing more, but taking part in this programme doesn't preclude us looking at other programmes as they come up and deciding whether to participate those in addition to this. This is cost neutral to the council. It's fully funded by the government, so I think it's a fairly straightforward proposal for Cabinet to agree to. Thanks.
Thank you. Did any of the officers have anything they'd like to add? Absolutely fine if you're just happy to take questions. No.
Just want to say thank you, Linda, for covering that so well. So that's very eloquent. So yeah, it's just really just to give you a little bit of insight from the previous programme in the Syrian Vulnerable Persons Scheme, where we resettled 30 families. Of 3 of those families, only 3 of the families actually moved out of Oxford. The rest are sustaining themselves quite successfully within Oxford, just to give you a little bit of context there, and also to help give some context where we've done the we reformatted the support that we provide. So we've because of the learning that we found from this original cohort, it's actually helped us to improve our support delivery, and we're making it much more bespoke, and so the individuals become much more empowered on their journey, and from that we've had much more success rates regarding employment. So if we look at the Afghan families, there's 10 families that have resettled since December 21, and 80% of households have at least one person in work. And for the United Kingdom resettlement scheme, where 8 families have been resettled since March 22, we have 43% of households. So this has been quite a dramatic difference in how, in that short term lifespan of the resettlement schemes. And obviously, you know, it does bring other benefits as well, not only to the refugee families that we're resettling, but this funding, as Linda's quite rightly pointed out, which is from Home Office grant funding, it does support the rest of the community as well by supporting programs like School Advocacy Project, the Refugee Employment Support Programme, which we've just launched, and also dedicated counselling service, which is going to be much more of a benefit to the wider community as well in the long run.
Thanks very much. Fantastic. So I'm open it up to questions first of all. So if anyone's got any questions they'd like to ask Linda or the officers, or everyone. Okay, yeah, Rosie, go ahead.
Great, thank you so much, and that's really positive to hear, and thank you for like sharing the learning on the previous schemes. So I'd be really interested just on that to hear like what specifically you were talking about, the slight change in support and how that looks. I'd be interested to hear a little bit more detail on that. But I also had just a few questions, if that's okay. Maybe I'll just run through them all to save time and then hand over if you like. The first was just a question on the number 8 families basically, and I noticed that like later on, and I may be misunderstanding, I understand that it's would be self-funding at this rate, but I just wondered what other numbers were modelled, why we came down on the decision on 8, and whether there was available funding to go for more. I might be misunderstanding Appendix 3, but I noticed that there's a column for 10 families where the level of income from the Home Office increases, for example, for 10 families. And I just wondered whether that was a possibility and why it was ruled out if not. And then I'd be really interested in just hearing about the way in which this, I think it said something around there, this being like reviewed annually in terms of kind of financial viability, and would be really interested to hear what that process is. And also just how we monitor the scheme generally. Sorry for like a bit of naivety there, but just really interested. Thank you so much. Those are my questions.
Thank you, Rosie. Yeah, so in answer to why 8 families, then that is really based on the fact that we want to be ambitious with the programme, but also we have to understand the needs or what the properties becoming available. As well. So that's why we've not pushed for 10 as such in the structure, but we have said that it is a minimum. So if we are fortunate enough to accrue more properties, then obviously we would like to take advantage of that. What we are saying is that from current experience, we have managed to obtain properties with little marketing, although that's been on the back of the media with the highlighting the atrocities and the needs of refugees, and so we've sort of on the back foot of that we've been able to get the momentum from unusual landlords coming forward who don't normally come forward and offering properties at below market rate. So we've been very fortunate there. So we have to be mindful that we can't guarantee that's going to happen going forward, and we are mindful that we may have to pay market rates as well. So highlighted in Appendix 2 what that difference will be. So that's really why we've sort of edged on the air of caution. But as I say, if we can be more ambitious, if the properties come forward, then of course, yes, we would love to. That minimum of 8, if we achieve that in the first year and we get another property, then that will take it over into the next year to go towards next year's, because obviously we don't know how the private rented sector climate is going to be and how that's going to fare year upon year. So we just need to make sure that we need to be onto this review annually, in the fact that we need to make sure that there's because we get 20,500 per head to support individuals, and that's across all the resettlement schemes. We need to make sure that we are making sure that's financially viable to deliver. And so we would look at those numbers. So in the appendix 2, we've based that on 29 families, and that's quite a mix. So that's a mix of a 4-bed, about 4 3-beds, and about 4 2-beds as well. So there's quite a mix. It really does depend on what properties we do obtain. So that's what dictates us. So what we do is, once we get a property come forward, we then go to the Home Office and say, this is the size property, can we fill it as much as we can to capacity? We have noticed that there have been 1 or 2 families which have not been filled to full capacity. So for instance, a 3-bed could potentially take up to 6 people if it's a large 3-bed, whereas we may have only used 4 people. So there's that opportunity to accrue more finance to come into the fund. And then monitoring, if I can come on to that. Sorry, Richard, did you want to come in before? No, okay. And then monitoring evaluation, what we do is, currently what we do, we have a review after the first month to see how families have settled in. Then we are reviewing again on the 5th month to see what their progress is. And then on the 11th month, we're looking at how they are adjusting into education, into English provision, how they're getting on with setting up their bank accounts, all those sort of practical things, and making sure they're registered with GPs and what have you. So this is something that we do towards the end of the year to make sure that that families are getting the right support as they need it. And then we will review that support into the 2nd year. So we have a 1st year of intense support wrapped around that family, linking into other support providers, service users, service delivery, and then we look at that at the end of the year to see what sort of level of support they need in the 2nd year, and then that will be adjusted to their needs. Hope that answers everything.
Thank you. Yeah, Richard, and then I might take a couple of questions together if that's okay, just to save time.
Just a quick one. Alan's provided a very comprehensive answer there. The only thing I would just say about the number 8 as well is that this scheme has a mixture of kind of variable costs and fixed costs, and 8 is at a level where we don't have to increase the fixed costs. And as soon as we go beyond that, we have to start thinking about, do we need basically a whole new Alan? So that will then make unviable 9, 10, 11 possibly, and then you have to jump all the way up to say 16 to then get it to balance again. So that's been the real challenge of finding the right number that means the current project as it's kind of put together all adds up. But as Alan said, if there is an ability to increase any numbers above that, the report allows for that flexibility. So hopefully we've hit the right balance to ensure that we're helping people we can, but equally it is fully self-funded and doesn't put any additional burden on the council's finances.
Nerissa, do you want to come in on that?
Yes, if you don't mind, Councillor Diggins, I was just going to make just one broader comment, which is, of course, this cabinet report sits, and it does references in the narrative of the report, sits within that wider kind of refugee and migrant work that we are doing. So, the Ukraine scheme operating in an entirely different way to these refugee schemes, but those are, from a housing homelessness perspective, we have to look at this in the round of all of the refugee work we do, which has increased exponentially in the last year in particular, and also we have to place it within the statutory frameworks of all of our housing need, which is also under pressure. So Richard's role, my role is to look across the whole piece and ensure that we can sort of stabilise and manage everything and this sits obviously within that context. So it's just to kind of just highlight that bit.
Yeah, thank you. I've got a question that's sort of off the back of this. Joe and Paula, are your questions sort of follow-on questions, or are you happy for me to jump in? Joe?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, following what Alan was saying, I apologise if I missed it because I had to leave the room for a moment. Are all the refugees who are housed placed in the same area, or are they housed around different parts of the city?
They are placed as of where we can get properties from, so it is all across the city. So we have quite a mix, whether it's East Oxford, we have some in Jericho area. So it is quite sporadic, but they all have to be within the city because the funding instructions stipulate that we have to find accommodation within our district.
So people who are from Syria, people who are from Afghanistan may or may not be living in close proximity to each other.
Not necessarily. Where we can, if you know, we settled a couple of Afghan families where we had the generosity of a charity raising money to purchase 2 properties for us, and we were able to place the 2 Afghan families probably about a couple of houses apart from each other, so they were in the same street. So that was quite remarkable, but it is quite rare, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you.
And just sort of off the back of the number of families, just there's a slight tension in the report on that, because you said that there is, you know, if there's a bit of flex in the report to increase it if at all possible, but it does then say in paragraph 21 that any surplus will be moved to the next year allocation, which sort of implies that there isn't any flex. That seems to be a bit of a tension, but maybe you could explain that one to me.
Yeah, I'll try. Yeah, so yeah, ideally what we're trying to do is we can't predict obviously the number of properties that we're going to get. So, and it is about making sure that we do meet that minimum per year of 8 to understand the viability of the scheme. And so what we want to make sure is that for the next year, we want to obviously try and succeed to get that minimum of 8 as well. So what we're hoping to do is that will do the contribution, and then there will be a rolling contribution if we're successful to get, you know, another 8, and so it goes on. But of course, if we get a glut of properties, then, you know, we can look at how we can work with those and make sure the support infrastructure is there to support those families as well. Because it's all about timing of when those families arrive as well. We need to make sure that they're not all coming at the same time, because they need that dedicated support at least 2 weeks around a family arrival. We need to make sure there's that space to give that support and make sure the family are bedded in. So what we have found historically is probably we've been lucky to get a family probably once every month for about 3 or 4 months, and then we get a gap. So it's very difficult to predict when those properties will become available.
Thank you. Maybe I could, Alice, we could work that up into a recommendation about a stipulation in the report about what to do if, because I do take your point about obviously also, you know, finding properties isn't necessarily an easy task either, so needing to ensure that the capacity is there for the following year, but maybe some kind of stipulation of making every effort to sort of, if we get, you know, a glut of properties, as you say, thinking about how we could expand where there's capacity to expand on that minimum, just also to remove that contradiction, I guess, in the report. Fantastic, thank you. That was an excellent explanation, and I very much understood it. So just moving on to Paula and then Rosie to ask your question.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I guess when we're talking about these families, we are aware that they are fleeing war and their lives are on the line. So I'm really hoping that we can be, and you know, if we want to be a city of sanctuary in Oxford, that we can be a bit more ambitious with that number. But I do appreciate that there is like implications to that. But if we can push for more, I'd be fully on board with that. I guess the question I had, and it's more just curiosity more than anything. We have a refugee and migrant officer and a senior refugee and migrant officer. I was just interested to know what the different remits are, and then kind of how the costing has been worked out, because you know there's a breakdown. So yeah, I'm just interested to know how that's all been worked out.
Okay,
Really.
so I'm the senior refugee migrant officer, and I have one reportee, which is the refugee and migrant officer. Okay, so my post has now been made a permanent post, and the other post is a fixed term at the moment. So my remit is the line management of refugee migrant officer, and more budgeting responsibility as well. But we support each other. We're very much, we have our strengths and weaknesses, and we support each other in that process, and we understand that process as well. So, so we have shared learning, and that's actually helped to develop this new model. My colleague has great support worker experience, and that's been a huge value to delivering this and understanding this trauma-informed approach as well. We're very mindful of the impact of how these families are resettled. It doesn't always come out in the beginning when they arrive. It's probably 18 months down the line, that's when we're trying to find that people are really struggling. So this is why it's been great that we have the experience and the knowledge in the team to actually understand these difficulties, and so we can actually help support them.
Great, thank you.
Richard, did you want to come in on that as well?
Again, I think Alan's covered things. I would just add as well that Alan now reports into a refugee resettlement and migrant manager, someone who's bringing together all that work in the council, because you know we've been talking about the growing need in this area. So that brings together all of Alan's resettlement work, but also a lot of the work we do around Ukrainians and asylum seekers as well into one team to look at the big picture and coordinate that. So that it's only a 1 year term, 1 year fixed term at the moment. Stephen Curran has been appointed to that and has been doing a good job over the last few months, and I'm sure Stephen will be able to come to the panel at some point throughout the year for one of the other reports, such as City of Sanctuary, to talk about that wider picture as well, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, maybe we could take that away and have a think, especially if people want to do a bit more of a scrutiny look at sort of the work being done to support, but we need to have a think about the scope of that as well. Rosie, your question.
Thanks. Sorry, I was just having a bit of time to think about the responses. So thank you very much for your advice, Alan, and help in understanding that as well. And Richard, I was just like trying to get my head straight and certain on then in which case whether the reason for the 8 and not going beyond that is mostly around it being self-funded at 8, and whether that's not possible, like if you were to increase the numbers, or whether it's because of the risk that it may not be within, because it may not be the number of houses or number of like places that become available. And I was just kind of wondering like what we can do to influence that in terms of like as a council to try and find those spaces and make them like make it possible to if that's kind of one of the sticking points. And I was also going to raise the same point that Lizzie mentioned about it being a minimum, but it clearly not until the final year, I suppose, because if they keep getting rolled in every year, then it's only in the final year that you suddenly are able. I know, as you were saying about people coming in at different times, it would appear to me that it's if we're going to say it's a minimum and there's some flexibility here, and we think that it might be that we could provide more spaces, whether it might make more sense to fill them as soon as they become available and count them not towards the 8 but towards the surplus, and just keep driving every year. If we feel like 8 is a reasonable and quite a conservative estimate, I suppose, to be safe, then maybe take that ambition could be in that flexibility each year was going to be one of my proposals. So I know, Lizzie, you suggested a recommendation might be to look at that tension, but I wondered whether a stronger thing, if officers thought it might be possible, and not too risky, proposing that the flexibility is within the year rather than at the end of the scheme.
I think if I can just come in there on about the resource issue. I mean, as Richard mentioned earlier, it is about sort of getting that balance right with how we do the funding, and as we increase the numbers, we need to make sure the resource is there, and we also need to make sure the support provider that we're looking to tender can actually cope with this additional increase as well. So it is a holistic approach. However, what I will say is that if we get this granted for a 5-year programme, I'm hopeful that we can have more discussions with colleges, with Aspire Social Lettings Programme, and also other portfolio landlords as well, to say we've got a longer programme now. We can think about and plan it ahead, and maybe we can get a better insight as to what we can deliver. As I say, yes, it has been, you could say, a little bit air on the caution. I've always been air of caution, but I think it's trying to think about what is realistic that we can deliver. We've known that we have achieved what we've achieved so far, 48 families since 2015, December 2015, which has been a remarkable achievement in such an expensive city. But of course, yes, we want to deliver more if we can. It's just trying to get those conversations going. And I think having this opportunity for a longer programme will allow us to do that and build up that relationship more, to search for improving that stock, that housing stock. Sorry, Richard.
Yeah, I suppose coming back to Rosie's point, I suppose slightly repeating myself, but it's just a real challenge in regards to, you know, if it's to flex a little bit, a few extra households, and we probably can just take that with the resource we've got. But if we were to do a more significant jump forward, say, you know, 15 to 20, that would entail a huge then jump in resourcing needed for that. You know, we'd need more staff, that kind of thing. And at that level, we would be running significant risk that we just couldn't source the properties. So we needed to set it at a level that we knew we could get the properties in to meet those commitments. And that's why we went with that number. You know, if we were to then go for a high number and we did think we could get the properties, we would then also need to weigh that against our wider priorities and the wider challenge that we've been talking about tonight, in that obviously we have a limited amount of PRS properties coming in to work, landlords willing to work with the council, and we're currently having to rehouse a significant number of Ukrainian households who are now falling out of the hosting arrangements. And then we have the ongoing huge challenge of homeless people who need to access the private sector as well. And it's a really, you know, we all want more properties, PRS properties, to be able to move people into, but there's a real kind of element of rationing in effect, because we just don't have enough to go around all the groups in high need. So that's why we kind of landed on that number. It really is trying to weigh up all those different priorities, but of course, you know, a huge challenge that we all understand here.
Iris, was there something you wanted to add on the back of that as well?
It's a really minor point, but and it's in line with what Richard was sort of describing there about the broader picture. But as part of this sort of work, some of the work that officers have to do in the background is sort of look at sort of financial appraisals of an impact on the council. So obviously the scheme of is faced entirely whilst we receive Home Office grant. But we also have to be mindful that in the future, you know, families where we are, for example, paying significant DHP for, that then becomes the liability of the authority going forward. And we just, as part of this sort of general kind of context setting, that the financial appraisal of the future risk in terms of finance for the council has to is an element of consideration, I guess, for us in terms of balancing that number and what we can and can't sort of manage. So it's a minor point, sorry, Lizzie, but just one worth mentioning, yeah.
Yeah, and that's the one it's written into the accounts, isn't it? When it says sort of, it's like it's written in as a small risk, but we always have to consider that liability may come back to fall upon us.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think does that cover it off for you, Rosie, or do you want to propose the recommendation still?
I think it would be helpful for us to be clear on what we mean by like it being a minimum if it can't increase until year 5. That's the thing I think I find quite difficult to understand. It feels like it's a maximum each year.
I think it's not necessarily. I think it's just there is flex, but there's not. I think the point of my understanding from what officers have said, please correct me if I'm wrong, is that there is flex. There's just not very much flex, because as soon as it jumps by too much, suddenly you're running a much larger program.
Okay.
It falls out of balance with other things. And I guess maybe our challenge could be, can we find a way to embed that in the report? Because currently, as you say, it's written in a way that I don't think is the way that officers are necessarily reading it, if that makes sense. I think there's a bit of tension from what we've just heard, which does suggest there is a little bit of flex there year on year, whereas actually if you're taking the report very, very literally, it says exactly what you've just said, Rosie. So I wonder if actually the tension we need to recalibrate is that one, from kind of making sure that that flex is written into the report. Does that make sense?
Is that right? Because that was very helpful, Richard, when you were saying that it's obviously like if you then had loads within a year, you've got, and Alan, you were both saying that there's a whole package of support that you need to provide for all these extra people, as well as just the houses and the staff and everything. And that obviously we couldn't achieve within 1 year. So is it that it's a small flexibility that could be, rather than a rolling over every time, but it's that maybe there's a maximum to the flexibility, but like it could be that in each year we have 10, 12, for example, or am I misunderstanding and getting a bit muddled?
I think,
yeah, sorry.
We apologise if the wording in the report is slightly confusing. The intention behind it is that we will be aiming for 8 each year. If we reach 8 really quickly, or say we have a landlord approach us who says, I've got 4 properties and you can have them, and they're, we're confident we can go above that, we then have the flex written into the report that we can go a bit further. So I think broadly speaking, you've got the, we've managed to get that across. We never want to be in a position where we have a tight report, then we have more properties coming and more capacity potentially, and then we have to turn families away. The way the report is written allows us to go above the 8, if that makes sense. But yes, we're not talking about huge increases above the 8, because then we would need to come back and ask for more resource basically. And is that, hopefully I've cleared that up.
Maybe,
super helpful. Yeah.
Could we have something in the report that says maybe like something like any significant surplus will be rolled on to the next year? I'm going to propose that as a recommendation, just because I don't know, I obviously don't write these reports, but I don't feel, for me, the tension in the report's been fully unknotted by that explanation. So I might propose that as a recommendation, but then obviously written explanation can help us out with that anyway. I had a quite different question, which may just be, again, something that's because of the way that the government's decided to use language in these ways, but there's quite a big language differential when we're talking about asylum seekers from Afghanistan and then refugees from Ukraine. So Ukrainians are described as refugees, people from Afghanistan are described as asylum seekers, and I know it's because of the Home for Ukraine scheme, but they're described as guests, whereas that's not how people from Afghanistan are described. And I don't know whether that is because that is a way that the government describes them and therefore the way we need to, or whether there is some capacity for us to be slightly more equal in our description of people fleeing war-torn countries.
Yeah.
But I appreciate that the government's not been setting the greatest example here, and also therefore may have tie our hands in how we can describe them in official reports.
I think if I may, it's the Homes for Ukraine is quite a different scheme in the fact that because it's relying on the sponsorship of hosts, etc. And this is where the terminology, dare I say, that they're using the word guests, and that's where that's come from. The immigration status of any other migrant coming in, obviously is dependent on what they're given when they come in. So yes, there may be some Afghans who are asylum seekers, but there are also Afghans who've come through the government recognised resettlement schemes, through the ARAP scheme and the ACRS scheme. So that's the Afghan Relocations Allocations Policy and the Afghan Citizens Resettlement Scheme. That's what those acronyms are for. So they are quite different resettlement schemes, and they are funded quite differently. And so with the funding of the government recognised schemes, along with the UKRS, the United Kingdom Resettlement Scheme, they have the same amount per head, 20,500 per head. The difference between the UKRS and the Afghan scheme is that the Afghan scheme is for 3 years, the UKRS is for 5 years, but it's the same money, it's the same value that we get. And so the cohort of asylum seekers, yes, we have got a hotel in the city, where there's approximately 220 asylum seekers there awaiting their asylum status to be sorted. And we've also got dispersed accommodation across Oxford as well, which are about 36 bed spaces at the moment, where they also are waiting for their status to be confirmed. And so until that stage, sorry. So
is it because of a difference in the status of Ukrainians? Yeah, okay. Because if you're from Ukraine, you've got a different asylum status than if you are from Afghanistan.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of schemes. So you've got the Families Reunified scheme from Ukraine, and you've got the Home to Ukraine scheme. So most who've come through the Home to Ukraine scheme will get up to a 3-year visa, okay, to remain here, and they have access to all public funds, etc. The Families I think it's called the Families Reunited scheme. They make their own way, and then they have to find their own funds to support themselves. But they can apply to come to the Home to Ukraine scheme if they lose accommodation, whatever. They can actually apply through that way. It gets very convoluted, but yes, it does depend on their status.
Okay, thank you. No, I thought that was probably going to be the case, but yeah, I thought I'd ask anyway. Yes, Paula.
Thanks, and yeah, thanks for raising that. I just think off the back of that, is there still room to change the language of that? Because it feels like there would be. And I think it's probably important to, or is it, yeah, like language isn't set in stone like that. So would we be able to improve those reports so that it is a bit more equal? Because it wouldn't be a nice read for anyone, I don't think.
I can certainly look through the report again just to make sure, but I don't think I've mentioned yes, but I need to double check that.
From my understanding of the process, I don't think we can change this current report, but any feedback around language we can always take forward into future reports.
Yeah, okay.
Maybe we could have that as a recommendation about considering the language we use around asylum seeker versus refugee, because I think they do have for reasons they carry different connotations.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Fantastic, thanks very much. That's been a really helpful and robust discussion. Does anyone have anything else they'd like to say before we move on to our final report? No? Okay. So our final report then is the STAR tenant satisfaction survey. So sorry, oh dear, my computer's just gone to sleep. Hang on. Sorry. So I'm going to invite Linda, Neris and Pat to introduce that one. So would you like to say anything, Linda, or pass on to Pat or Neris?
I'll leave most of it to them, but just to say, overall, this is a a good set of results, so everyone should be pleased with it. Obviously, we can't be complacent. There's still 13% of our tenants that aren't satisfied, and the report does provide some areas for us to focus on, which is very helpful, and that includes repairs and communications. And I really hope that new technology that's being rolled out in ODS, which will help tenants keep up to date with repairs and communicate with ODS much more effectively through apps and online contact and text messages, that will help us make progress in that area and help us get better results next time when it comes to how tenants feel about how we communicate with them. That's all I'll say for now. Thanks.
Oh, fantastic. And would you like to contribute, Nerys, Pat?
I will hand over to Pat, actually, if that's okay, and take you through the slide.
Right, hello everybody. I'm Patricia Andrade, or Pat Andrade. I'm the interim tenancy management manager in tenancy services. I'm here to do the presentation. So if I share my screen and go through the slides, is that okay with everyone? Yes.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, screen. Can you see my screen? Can you see the survey?
Yes.
Okay, all right, okay. So the STAR survey, which stands for the Survey of Tenants and Residents, is a statutory requirement that takes place. Used to be every 2 to 3 years, now it's on an annual basis. This survey is from the previous financial year, and it was carried out by Acuity Research and Practice. There has to be a certain level of participants in this survey to actually validate, but actually have confidence in the results of the assessment from the satisfaction survey. Our target was 925 responses, but we achieved 928 responses, and from the responses, Acuity undertook telephone interviews, and that gave us a good level of confidence in the report, in the results from the survey. From Acuity has commented on the satisfaction with the services delivered by the council as good and maintaining good levels despite a general fall in satisfaction across the sector. In comparison to other landlords, we actually rate quite well in the key measurements, and we are above the average in the majority of the measurements. There are only 2 measurements that we overall came below, and that was listening to views and acting upon them from the survey. So what were the key findings? Every measure except overall satisfaction has improved. As I said earlier, the results are above the average bar 2 measurements. The comments captured was invaluable and insightful. Obviously, it helps inform our services to improve, enhance, or change. Where consent was required, we contacted the relevant parties and we gained consent. The overall negative comments were around historical repairs and maintenance issues. There's been proactive communication to promote improvements in our repairs and maintenance, and engagement in activities to drive listening, to actually drive listening and to improve that listening skill for the organisation. Keep up the efforts of the drivers and consider moving the overall satisfaction question to the end. I think the question was placed at the beginning or near to the beginning, and I think respondents concentrated on that more, and there was a kind of a low rating for landlord services. So actions following the survey, what has taken place to date, how are we improving the service in the day-to-day repairs? We have a live dashboard in place which actually feeds in extracted information from our QL system, and also that enhances the reporting from Power BI reports. There's a full rollout of the dynamic resource scheduler, which affects the contact centre and ODS, where operatives or individual staff members can book appointments for repairs. There's get it first right time, fixed right time in place, graft and stock contract in place. The Versa handheld equipment enables operatives, when they're out on the job, if there are follow-up jobs to be done, they can actually undertake that and book the appointments there and then with technology. We have a proactive damp and mold re-inspection programme, which has been extended. ODS are taking on customer care training, and that's scheduled, possibly due to end, I believe, the end of this month or into August. And we are, with ODS, have the locals, so I might have pronounced that wrong, forgive me, text messaging and post-work satisfaction surveys. So when appointments are being made, the operatives can say, I'm an hour away from your home, I'll be with you at this time. The text can go to landlines and mobile phones. All your mobile phones only can say, well, I'm in the back garden, can you not come round the back instead of the front so I can answer the door? This will also help with access, minimising access, improve access to carrying out the repairs as well. So that's a technology issue there. We also have home and neighbourhood improvements. We've got planned maintenance and great estate improvements that are ongoing. That is to look at our externals on the estates and obviously planned works, internal and external, to our properties. There's a rollout stock condition survey that's been procured. We have, in communications and engagement, a new customer and care complaints officer managing obviously our care and complaints, coming in, make sure that we are responding and investigating complaints in a qualitative way. There are other posts to be recruited through landlord services transformation, and also there's the customer portal, which allows customers to be able to access their rents and report repairs from June. So that, again, technology is coming in so that it makes it more efficient for our customers to do that any point during the day, 24 hours. Now waiting mobile working devices to improve engagement and capturing, updating tenant profile information. And then we've had a successful bid for the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund of 2.6 million. I'm working on an active engagement communication plan, and we have an ambassador on that project board. Antisocial behaviour, programme of engagement with tenants complete. There's been new messages around expectations and how we investigate antisocial behaviour, improved information and details on the website pages, and an antisocial behaviour policy and procedures being launched and is active. In housing services, the service integration project phase 1 is active, and that's working with our communities, looking at how we provide service locally and support and empower individuals in our neighbourhoods and in the communities. Additional resources in tenancy and allocations teams have been recruited. We've had Housemark, an external consultancy agency, coming in and undertake a review of services provided as landlord services, as landlord. The social housing white paper actions and requirements are being proactively managed. Recommendations from Housemark, outstanding STAR actions, housing homeless panel recommendations be delivered through the Housing Services Transformation Programme, and the Landlord Services Transformation Programme team have been recruited, where appreciative inquiries with stakeholders have been completed, and process and journey mappings on our processes and procedures are underway. So sorry, excuse me. I've got yeah, okay. So what are the actual satisfaction outputs from the survey have been? So for overall satisfaction for the home, It's improved from 67% to 78%, and that's a 0.12% increase, which is great. House satisfaction that the home is safe and well maintained, that went increased from 80% to 85%, so a plus 5%. Again, good result. A steady increase, which is great. Satisfaction that communal areas are clean and well maintained, again 75% to 80%, again plus 5%, which is again a steady increase. Satisfaction with energy efficiency and level of insulation, that is a new measurement, and that's at 68%. So there's no comparison, good or bad, it's just 68% because it's a new measurement in the survey. Satisfaction with repairs and maintenance, 76 was the previous result, and it's moved slowly to 79%, so plus 3%. Satisfaction with repairs service in the last 12 months, from 79% to 85%, plus 6%. Satisfaction with the time taken to complete the most recent repair in the last 12 months, that's a new measurement. Again, there's no comparison, it's just at 79% satisfaction level. Satisfaction that tenants are kept informed about things that might affect them, that's moved from 76% to 83%, so that's plus 7%. Again, a good increase. Satisfaction with the overall appearance of the surrounding area and neighbourhoods, that's gone up quite significantly from 73% to 84%. That's plus 11%. Satisfaction with neighbourhood as a place to live, again a good increase, 75 to 84%, which is plus 9%. Satisfaction with rent as a value for money, that is a plus 6% from 81 to 87%. And satisfaction with service charge as value for money, 68 to 70%, plus 2%, steady increase in that area. Satisfaction with the council treating tenants fairly with respect, that's gone up plus 9% from 73 to 82%. Satisfaction with how the council listens to tenants' views and acts upon them, that's gone up plus 10% from 55 to 65% satisfaction level. Satisfaction with the council, how the council handles antisocial behaviour, final outcome, that's gone up from 49% to 68%, that's plus 19%, quite a big satisfaction increase in that area. Satisfaction on how a complaint has been handled, again a great increase on here, 49% to 66%, that's gone up to 17%, which again is a good satisfaction outcome. Satisfaction with customer service, it's gone up by 1% from 85 to 86%. And then this is where I mentioned earlier about the overall satisfaction with housing and the repair service is one of the questions that I was placed at the near the beginning of the survey, and we're going to place this towards the end of the survey because that might give us a better output when the tenants and residents get to this question. But it's been a decrease from 76% to 75%, 1% increase, but it's not good. Sorry, decrease, but it's not good to have a decrease. I would rather have a positive than a negative. So so positive comments on the overall satisfaction. Positive comments was 38%. Right, at 38%. I don't think I need to go through all these listings for you, because I think the rest of the slides are looking at the positive comments made and then the breakdown for those. Is that all right with you, Councillor Diggins? Is that all right if I don't go through all of these? Yeah, I'm just going to repeat, and I think you're going to die of boredom from my voice, if I'm honest, if I can say that. So you've already got this in your pack. So I'm not kind of, and that's it. I'm not trying to evade presenting, if that makes sense. We'll stop sharing, evade presenting. But I think if I go through that, I think you'll all fall asleep and forget about a cocoa. So yeah.
No, thank you. And
Thank you.
it was really helpful and comprehensive and laid out the information in a really useful way. Did any officers want to feed in on that before we open up to questions? No? Okay, fantastic. So let's start with any questions from anyone first of all? Yeah, should we take questions together? So Paul, if you want to say your question or questions, and then Lawrence.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. It's really good to see overall that the feedback was, pretty positive, and I was really pleased to see that Cowley in particular had like the most satisfied residents when it comes to repairs. So that was a nice read. I guess my questions are around what will the council do to address the 14% that were dissatisfied with their home? And I'm also interested in how the survey was conducted, whether it was online or in person or door to door, because I'm aware that like the survey participation, I know it met the target, well, it went above target, but in my mind, it's still relatively low in comparison to how many tenants there actually are in council homes. So I was just wondering how we can increase that participation if possible. So yeah, they're my questions mainly. But great presentation, so thanks.
And if you're happy, if we take a question or questions from Lawrence and then feedback. So go ahead, Lawrence.
My question was really just a request for the next version of the survey. It would be very useful to look at the number of council properties in a particular ward, or a number of tenants rather in a particular ward, because although if I look at my ward, then there were 36 responses in one category. Without going and counting all the properties or bringing up housing and finding out the number of properties, it's very difficult to work out whether that's a significant percentage of the tenants or a very small number of the tenants. And I suspect that applies to all the other wards as well. So that was a question really. Next year, could we have the number of tenants per ward and the number of responses shown in the tables which tell you the responses from each ward?
Thank you. Yeah, if would you like to feedback on that, Patricia, or would you, Nerys, on those questions?
I was going to pick up the question of dissatisfaction, and then maybe Pat will pick up some of the ones on how they were carried out. But I think just in terms of Lawrence's last point, absolutely we can do that. We can just sort of when that presentation comes back, we can just add that information in. So that's no problem at all. The dissatisfaction, is a really key question. I think I'd mention a couple of things. In Pat's presentation, she refers to the rolling stock conditions survey, and that is a really significant piece of work. That will essentially assess all of our properties in a way that we haven't done for a very long time. And that will then in turn inform capital programs of work that will enable us to kind of improve the quality of people's homes in a really strategic way and in a very financially efficient way. So I think this sort of, that stock condition survey is underway. I'm really pleased to say, and we should be, and we have organised it in a way that the sort of worst performing homes are to be surveyed first, along with other areas of concern around health and safety matters that are already known to us, and situation, for example, where we've got a lot of damp and mould. So that will then, we are confident that we'll have sufficient information sort of for programming work into 24-25. So as we go into the next financial year, we will start to roll that programme out. And then it's a rolling program, so that will keep on kind of rolling through, and that will put us in a much stronger position around how we are maintaining our stock. So I think that I will sort of, I think that for me is the really key answer to to that question, Councillor Dunn. I will leave that there, but maybe if Pat wants to add anything just in terms of the how the survey was carried out. I think that's the outstanding.
That's really great, thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Dunn, yeah. The survey was carried out by putting a QR code on Tenants in Touch on the website and encouraging people to use the QR code to then go through and fill the survey in. Acuity is the independent company that we use. They did it through telephone, so they contacted the person in question and had a conversation with them, so it's totally independent, so there was no door knocking or anything like that. I think the difficulty with star surveys is encouraging individuals to get involved. Having 12%, which I think is about 12% is 9, 20, 25, is a good result really in terms of things, but it takes a lot of work to get that 12%. Maybe as we go forwards from this survey into the next survey, we might get more people getting involved. If they see the changes taking place as well, and they can feel that change, then that gives them confidence to say, okay, yeah, I can get involved in a survey, they are going to change, they are listening, there are improvements, and therefore it's about how we sell what we're doing and how we encourage people to get involved with us as well. But this time around it was a QR code, sorry, and people that use their mobile phones more to engage with Acuity, and then Acuity undertook telephone conversations with them. I hope that answered your question, Councillor Dunn.
It does, thank you. And I'm really glad that it had both the phone option and the QR code, because I'm mindful that sometimes people struggle with technology in that way. So yeah, that's great, thank you.
Did that cover your question? As yeah, if we maybe put that as a, did we get Lawrence's question down as a recommendation as well, even if it's going to be accepted? I think it'd be good to have it noted down. I had a couple of questions, but happy to take some others before I go for it. Okay, so I guess one of the questions, I mean, some of these you might not going to be able to answer, but I've got a couple of questions about why you might think certain results emerged. So there was sort of a slightly jarringly, I mean, it was great across the board, and then in Kidlington, for example, there's a really low result. Is that actually, before I just, is that partly because a lot of the properties in Kidlington, are they ones where we provide the properties and people pay service charge rather than council rented ones? Sorry, I realise I've garbled that. No,
I don't think so. I can't answer that question specifically. I'd have to go back and come back to with a response on that, Councillor Duggins. We have properties across the board, a mixture of mixed dwellings across the board, not just specific dwellings in specific areas. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, to be honest.
Yeah, just because Kidlington, I guess, because Kidlington obviously falls just outside the city.
It could be because we've only got like a very small number of properties in Kidlington, and so one response, one unhappy person is going to have a.
Yeah, I wondered if it was kind of something. Yeah, that's what I was getting at. Is it something potentially weird coming out in the data just because of where it is geographically? Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I also looked at sort of the area split when you get sort of antisocial behaviour as well, and is that something that's being, I assume you're sort of taking those and looking at them together, and rather than maybe taking ASB as one big thing across the city, looking at, okay, why have we got such negative responses in these places, and in other places it doesn't really seem too much of an issue. But I wondered if that's sort of been fed into the action plan off the back of it.
That is my understanding, that we look at the actual global, but we look at the breakdowns and then try and understand what is going on in those areas, try and understand what we need to do. So each area we might have a different plan or promotion or whatever in that area, because we have to communicate on a different level. It's like having sub-markets in the market. So yeah, so we can understand our tenants more, to be honest with you, and how we communicate. So yes to that, Councillor Duggins.
Fantastic. And did people give sort of, in the section where it's talking about, it says most people, I think it was like 89% of people would consider energy saving measures being installed in their homes, but 11% wouldn't. Obviously, this is forming a part of like ongoing other work that the housing team's doing. Were there options where people could explain their reasons for why they didn't support that, if that makes sense. So they could say no because, and then maybe a drop down.
Okay, yeah, right. I can't answer that question for you specifically, Councillor Douglas, because I wasn't involved in the kind of the establishment of the survey, so I don't know. There was yes and no answers, and then, as you said, were they able to give more information? But Neris might be able to come in and help me on that one. Neris?
I don't have a specific either, but there was free text, and I mean some of the kind of comments towards the end of the presentation cover those. And I don't think we have picked up anything specific that says why they wouldn't want it. And we do have sort of some understanding of from actually not necessarily from this survey, but from the LAD 1B work that we did about why tenants didn't want us coming into their properties at the time. But some of the work the tenant involvement team have done more recently across that board is I think things have changed. We've got much better tenant involvement as we prepare for SHDF work, and of course the energy crisis it has moved many people's minds, you know, in terms of allowing that, and actually our own response and kind of preparation for the SHDF programme, for example, will put us in better stead to engage with our tenants early, to support them, to help them understand the impact of the work on their homes, for example, and also to ensure that they have alternative accommodation if the work is relatively intrusive, you know, which in some cases it may be. I will double check whether we did have any free comments on your very specific point, but I hope that gives you a slightly broader picture of what we do in this space.
Yeah, no, that was really helpful. Thank you. And I guess in terms of actions arising, you know, broadly, as we've said, really positive, great to see. But in those areas where, you know, there's either been a drop or we're slightly below the median, have you given any consideration to sort of learning from best practice from other councils? And also, if there is sort of an action plan that arises from that, would it be possible to maybe get a brief update from that to our panel, maybe when we receive the KPIs, even just to see how that work's going? Obviously, work might be a capacity issue, but just wondered on that front. Yeah, Neris.
I will just very, so we've covered in terms of sort of improvements or repairs and maintenance, I've sort of mentioned that, but in terms of listening to our tenants, I think it's linked very closely to the transformation work we're doing, the thinking we're doing in this space. So the answer is yes, absolutely. And we will have sort of pending the changes, you know, additional officers who will work very specifically in this space around communication and complaints. They do go hand in hand. So, and that is going to be set up in such a way that, for example, it's not that we deal with complaints. What I'm really wanting to embed in terms of a culture is that we learn from those complaints, and then actually the lessons learned are then embedded back through into the service, so there's a continuous sort of improvement of performance across our board. But we can, I think maybe yes, we can. When we bring the next KPI set of KPIs through, we can kind of bring some additional commentary to you on progress in terms of specific actions here.
That'd be fantastic. Like, yeah, as you say, a lot of that other work is being put into scrutiny work plans anyway, because we're going to have a look at the transformation work under separate cover. But I guess just tying it into this work strand, because this is also something that obviously comes back to us, it's quite interesting to see, you know, where it's going across the year as well. Obviously wouldn't want to put too much of a strain on you saying, you know, monthly updates, but getting an update before we get, rather than just when we get the next report, might be interesting. But maybe we can see how that goes. Fantastic. I think that was my set of questions. Did anyone have anything else they'd like to ask? Not seeing any, in which case just thank you to both you and all of the officers this evening that answered lots and lots of questions and been really helpful. So thanks very much. And then I think the next, if you don't obviously, and you feel no obligation to stick around for the next bit, because I think we're just doing other, unless I'm very wrong, we've just got to work out the dates of our future meetings now. And the only point that I wanted to gauge was our next meeting is on the 2nd of August, which is a which is a Wednesday. Hang on, let me double check. Obviously
a Wednesday, I think.
Yeah, a Wednesday in August in the summer holiday. So I wanted to check from our panel members whether that's going to cause anyone any difficulties, because I want to make sure that we're going to be able to be court. So does that work for you, Rosie, Paula and Lawrence?
Yes, it does. Yes.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
In which case,
it's already in my diary.
Same. Yeah.
I was slightly worried I wouldn't be able to join because I wasn't not 100% sure I'd have Wi-Fi, but I will be able to. So that means unless something, obviously emergencies happen, but I think we should therefore go ahead with the 2nd of August date. Fantastic.